minister to be publicly identified. And soon after this, the Chinese propaganda mills went into action. A disinformation campaign was waged against Kenny. Social media platforms, including WeChat and Weibo, called him anti-China, misrepresented the legislation, and the result was that in 2021 election he lost it. Now half of his riding is comprising of Chinese Canadians, and his loss represents a big win for China. Now that was a clear case of interference. When Chinese promoted social media was criticizing it, Government of Canada should have banned that media. And the people who were supporting that media should have been told this is not acceptable. But that was not done because he was a Conservative MP. Possibly the political interest overwhelmed the national interest. Now, recently, intelligence services report, and they believe, intelligence sources, that Chinese Toronto consulate interfered in 2019 federal election, and they provided $250,000 in funding via Communist Party proxy group to an alleged network. Now, the group allegedly targeted 11 candidates in both the Liberal and the Conservative parties. So it was not a partisan party, it was both. And these were the MPs whose election and victory China was interested in. They also placed staffers in the certain MP's office to influence policy. A global news report identified a Toronto businessman who dispersed funds from the Chinese Toronto consulate through Canada-China associations and ultimately the election campaign, which is strictly illegal according to the Canadian Election Act. But no action was taken. However, he is being investigated, and he also has a role to play in the Chinese police stations that were identified by the in Canada by an International Human Rights Commission. So these actions show very clearly that Canada needs a strategic policy. And these police stations are at present in Toronto and Vancouver. They house Chinese police agents who pressurize selected individuals to return to China, or their families back home would suffer. And the Chinese embassy says that stations simply issue driving and health cards which are Chinese national, which is not acceptable. Investigations are going on, and let's see. But such investigations are not only in Canada. They are in 13 different countries. Now, I must give credit to Mr. Trudeau that he raised his concern about the Chinese interference, but the way it was done was not proper. The end was perfect. The methodology was wrong. And he didn't tell, he says that the Canadians need to know everything, but he did not tell what the response of presidency was. He did say that Canada is a free society, and then why has he not told it? Anyway, I'll still commend him for conveying the concern that Canada has about the Chinese interference. Now let's take up what Canada should do. There is a 5-point plan. 5 steps are required, and the most immediate imperative is for the police to investigate the funding allegedly provided by the Chinese consulate to the 11 candidates, and they should charge any Canadian who subverted the law, expel the consulate or the embassy official who is implicated. Security clearance of the people identified in MP's office should be verified immediately, and action should be taken. That is the first step. As I said, this 5-pronged attack is required to protect themselves. It's not for offensive, it's being offensive defensive. Second, action has to be that the Canadian authorities, they need to become much more sophisticated about attacking, being attacked by the cyber. Nowadays, cyber attacks are going to be there, and Canada lacks the capability of tracking those attacks. They should have sophisticated capability in tracking cyber attacks, social media bots, information campaigns, and also develop tactics to counter them. Now here I must say that they can take a lesson from Taiwan. Taiwan is one of the best countries as far as this aspect is concerned. And they have faced these issues for years. This is what I talked was about the cognitive war. Now the war is not only the war in the battlefield. It's cyber war, it's space war, and it's cognitive war, thought war. China had waged cognitive war against Taiwan for the last 40 years. And Taiwan has a Minister of Digital Affairs now. Imagine it. Whose job includes ensuring the post of accurate information in the social media, as well as cyber tracking experts who would experience and would be able to track down such people. Now, such experience of Taiwan would be ideal for the Canada to follow. And it's easy. We don't have bad relations with Taiwan. We have not recognized Taiwan as a country. So we should recognize Taiwan and take their help. Now, in this point, this was another point which I found missing in the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy document, which was released by the Foreign Minister, Mr. Jolly, the other day. That document, as I said, is lopsided. And it lacks the essential aspects, for example, ignoring Taiwan and ignoring India. That is a ridiculous one. Anyway, coming back to that, the third prong is for those Canadians of Chinese, Uyghur and Tibetan descent, as well as Falun Gong followers. Government of Canada should create a single office that will enable them to report harassment, and then those complaints of harassment by the Chinese of Canadians of Chinese, Uyghur and Tibetan descent, and Falun Gong, they should be coordinated. All agencies, whether CSIS or RCMP or military intelligence even, they should coordinate so that necessary, appropriate investigations are conducted and legal action taken. And the government should feel shy of immediately taking action. You know, the worst thing government did was when US wanted extradition of Weiwei, Vice President Meng, they should not have dilly-dallied. They should have immediately handed over to USA. And that would have, A, mended relations with USA. Secondly, it would have sent a message to China that Canada is capable of looking after itself. And it would not bother about the diplomatic niceties even to protect its interest. And that's what required. President Xi didn't observe any nicety. He was very brusque and he was rude. Now, this is not something new. As a matter of fact, the Canadian Coalition of Human Rights in China and similar associations have already been requesting Government of Canada for such an action. But then Government of Canada is moving at a snail's speed. It has to change its response time. Now, the fourth prong of this five-pronged strategy would be that the Foreign Influence Registry Act championed by the former MP Chui should be reintroduced and passed. And this time, the government should take initiative of introducing the same bill which was introduced by the Conservative Party. And the result would be that the government itself, rather than an individual MP, would be introducing it, because the individual MP can be targeted by the Chinese. The government as per se cannot be. The bill, this is called the Bill S-237, is already in Senate. It's a good first draft that will ensure transparency for the people who are acting on behalf of foreign interests, whether of China or of any other country in Canada. And the fifth prong, the government should introduce comprehensive foreign interference legislation. Such a legislation was introduced in England, UK, earlier this year, and that formed a part of UK's National Security Act. And that's a good proposal. That law would make any Canadian helping foreign agencies to further their nefarious activity a criminal offense. And punishment for that should be life imprisonment. This is worse than murder, because it's betraying the nation. Now, these five-pronged strategy would enable to disrupt and deter foreign interference, and also increase the penalties under existing British election laws. Now in Canada, the maximum fine is $250,000 and maximum 6 months in jail, which is not sufficient. It should be life imprisonment, and it should be $10 million fine. RCMP national security sources are making clear, and I quote from RCMP, incidents of the Chinese Communist Party interference, operations are increasing in scale, intensity and brazenness, and investigators and community sources are expressing alarms and fear for the Canadian institutions. This is crystal clear. RCMP has told, and yet if the government doesn't act, then I think the government doesn't deserve to rule. The government has to act on these serious challenges. They are challenges to the Canadian nation, to the Canadian democracy, to the Canadian way of life, to the Canadian system, and that cannot be accepted. I've seen this standing up to presidency by Trudeau and other senior cabinet ministers. They have stood up, but that's not enough. Words are not enough. Deeds require to be there. And the deeds require a proper strategy. And this five-pronged strategy, if the government of Canada adopts it, would definitely go a long, long way in ensuring that not only China, but no other country would be impudent enough to interfere in our affairs. And anybody who interferes would have a bloody nose. And that should be there. Thank you.